Thank you for tuning in to the Logic of God podcast. I'm Cody.
I'm Gina.
And I'm Ben.
If you're returning, thank you for coming back. And if you are a new guest, welcome.
So a question that I wanted to ask is, do we think that heaven and hell came into existence at the time of creation?
That depends on where you think heaven and hell reside.
Yeah, I guess that does beg the question, what do we mean by heaven and hell? Because it does say, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
Yeah.
If you're like me, then you believe that the earth eventually will be hell. Yes.
We did, disclosure, we did an episode on a place called Sheol, which no one listened to, and I can understand because you see that and you're like, what is Sheol? Okay, but there was a place that was the realm of the dead, and it's repeatedly referenced all throughout the Old Testament. We don't need to go into that much detail about all the mentions of it. There's a lot of mentions of Sheol, and I would highly recommend everyone go and listen to our episode on Sheol because there's a lot about it in the Old Testament.
And we know you haven't listened to it.
We know you haven't listened. Don't lie. You haven't.
We're watching the statistics.
But the long story short is that Sheol is the place that the Jews in the Old Testament and also at the time of Christ believed that's where the dead went. At the time of Christ, they referred to it as Hades or Hades, but that's just another way of saying Sheol. That was the Greek word for Sheol, the realm of the dead. Now, Sheol was split into two parts. There was Gan Eden, or paradise, and this is the place that both Jesus and Paul referred to. Jesus, when he says, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise," and Paul, when he talks about a man who is caught up to the third heaven to paradise. Two different people in the New Testament reference this place, Gan Eden. Sheol is split into two parts. The first is Gan Eden. The second is Gehenna, often just referred to as still Sheol or Hades. Because when you're talking about the realm of the dead, usually it's assumed you're talking about the bad part, Gehenna. But regardless, it is split into those parts. Gan Eden, which is paradise, which is beautiful, and there's Gehenna, which is torment and fiery suffering. We do know that the heavens, as in the physical heavens, were made, because that's what Hashamayim, I think, is the term in Genesis. That's heavens.
Sounds right.
Yeah.
We'll go with it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Hashamayim, and that's the physical heavens, everything. So that's the sky above you, the stars in the sky, and debatably even the place where God resides currently, because he didn't need a physical dwelling place of any kind, or even a spiritual dwelling place necessarily, because he doesn't need to dwell anywhere. But once he creates his creation, there is a place that he dwells with his glory, and it's the place where the angels are, and we see that stairway to heaven in Genesis as well, with the story of Jacob as he's traveling to see his uncle Laban. There's the part where he falls asleep and he uses a rock as a pillow. And then during his dream, he sees this great stairway going up into the sky and angels ascending and descending to the earth. So we can assume that, sure, the spiritual heaven was created at that time. However, even if you want to go with the pearly gates thing that a lot of Christians say is where you go when you die, and I don't think any of us here believes that necessarily. But let's say for the sake of argument, that is what we're talking about for heaven. That's mentioned in Revelation as the place that Jesus is going to prepare. This is the New Jerusalem. So even that didn't exist at this point. So did hell exist at this point? Did Sheol exist, this paradise and Gehenna place where the souls would go?
People didn't exist yet. So there wouldn't have been a point for it. And if God, I don't know how to say this without being inflammatory.
Be inflammatory,
Yes,
but go for
please
it.
Be inflammatory.
God knew that he was going to give people free will. Calvinists come at me. But did he prepare a space just in case? Or did he wait until man made the mistakes that they made to then have a place for them to go? Because if we weren't going to die pre-fall, then there wouldn't have been a purpose for an afterlife place.
It's, I don't know, because I tend to lean towards annihilationism, but hell was also not meant for us, it was meant for the angels and his demons, correct? Is that in Peter or Matthew?
That is, the lake of fire is for them. But also, there's the abyss that's mentioned in Revelation where the demons come out of, where the abyss is broken open and all of these terrible creatures that are demons effectively come out onto the world. It seems to be that's the place where all of the demons have been thrown. They're not in Gehenna. Humans are in Gehenna. I could be wrong on that, but it does seem like it's a different word. It could be a different word still referring to Sheol, but usually it's referring to Hades or Hades. And in Revelation, it talks about how Jesus has the keys of death and of Hades, and also how death and Hades are thrown into the lake of fire at the end. The abyss is not. The devil is thrown back into the abyss and he's sealed in there with chains, and then eventually he breaks out at the end.
In Revelation, where does the lake of fire come in?
At the very end.
Was that created right at the end?
Yes,
that's made at the end. Death and Hades are thrown in there. I would think Sheol existed, but hell does not exist until the lake of fire.
That kind of depends on what you think Sheol actually is. If we consider Sheol to be an absence of God, it can be made at any time. Effectively, it's just God withdrawing his presence and putting the people who have rejected him there. The trouble is that Hades is actually more of a holding place, because keep in mind, we're all going to be judged at the end of time. Why would God throw someone into a place that they're meant to be punished for all of eternity before he's judged them, and he's going to bring them out to judge them at the end anyway? And then at that point, he throws them into the lake of fire. What's all this about? From everything that I've looked into, and this is why I was so excited to talk about this, I do think the Bible actually does tell us, both when paradise was created and also when Hades was created. The term for this paradise is Gan Eden. And according to Jewish tradition, and not all Jews believe this, but according to Jewish tradition, this place where the souls go, and this is touched on by Michael Heiser's work, where he talks about this place being where the divine council resides. Gan Eden is actually the original Eden, and it's being protected by angels, and you can't find it. And so that is where the souls of the righteous go. And that's because they're awaiting judgment at the end. You don't go to heaven because you don't reside with God yet until you've been judged, but you're not punished because you're a righteous person. And so your soul goes to Eden, which is, and at the same time, if you're not in Eden, you're outside of it. And so when you're dead and outside of Eden, this is the place that is dark and terrible, and you're separated from God. And so you're in torment.
But both are on earth.
They are, and they're not. It's weird. So they are in some way separated, but both are still considered to be part of the world in some sense. And it's getting a bit too, there's a lot of conjecture there as to how that could work, and I don't want to go into that, and I don't fully understand it myself. But just the idea that Eden served an initial purpose. It was going to be the place where we lived and where the glory of God dwelt, and he walked amongst us. And not just that, but where the angels lived.
And Adam and Eve were called to expand. It could have very well taken over the entire planet.
That was where the kingdom of God was. And so the idea that God just sectioned that off from the rest of the world for no reason, like it doesn't serve any purpose anymore. That does seem strange to me. Why did God set it aside and then put two angels and a sword over it to guard it so that humans couldn't find it? Why would he do that?
I don't know. I feel like we're getting into Bible fanfic.
A little bit. And there is some conjecture, but this isn't conjecture that's being made up. This is a part of Jewish tradition. Mm-hmm. And this is a part of the Jewish tradition that Jesus is referring to and Paul is referring to, Gan Eden and Gehenna. Now, there may be details about that we're still wrong. Absolutely. But it's interesting to me that seems to be what Jesus is talking about in his parable. And again, I've said it 1,000 times in previous episodes. It's tough to extrapolate too much from a parable. But it is a parable that Jesus is using to describe the afterlife, what happens to us after we die. And we know that we don't go all the way up into heaven, or at least we didn't at that point. You can make the argument that we do go into heaven to live in the glory of God now. I don't agree with that necessarily, but I won't split hairs.
Post-Christ.
Yeah, post-Christ. Yeah. But pre-Christ, that definitely wasn't the way that it worked. In answering to the original question, did God make heaven and hell originally in preparation for the mistake he knew we were going to make? I don't believe so. I think that those came into existence as a result of what we did. And yes, technically heaven did exist, but that wasn't its purpose. It gained a new purpose after we sinned.
And heavens in Genesis chapter 1 is different than heaven.
Yes. Heavens is plural and refers to everything above us. It's the atmosphere above us. It's the sky, the clouds, everything. What Paul refers to as the third heaven, generally it's interpreted as that there are the three different types of heaven. There's the sky above us, and then there's the stars and everything beyond that, and then there's the third heaven, the place we go to when we die. That's the Christian interpretation. There are 7 heavens in Jewish tradition, and this is the tough thing about going to tradition, because we don't believe everything that the Jews taught. And they teach about 7 different heavens, and their 7 heavens are a bit strange. There's a place where manna is prepared, and there's all sorts of weird stuff in that. Again, you can go to our episode on heaven for that. But so yeah, we don't believe everything that the Jews taught on this stuff. They definitely didn't get everything right. And yet there seems to be bits and pieces from what they taught that is right. That's why things like the Book of Enoch are referenced by Jude. It's not that everything in Enoch is right, but there's clearly something in there that is.
I'd have to read it again. It's been a while since I've read Enoch, but how you're describing Gan Eden and Sheol is, if I remember correctly, eerily close to how Enoch is describing it. And oral tradition has Enoch and Elijah living in Eden itself until everybody thinks they're the witnesses in Revelation. So until they're called to die. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of Jewish tradition that points to that model.
And there's also the fact that Enoch walked with God. Where did he walk with him to? There's that word. The walking is walking without an intention, walking without a destination, just walking for the sake of doing it with the pleasure of God. Was he physically walking with him? Because Adam did that in Eden.
And you also have this, like another theme in the creation story is Eden as a temple. And Bible Project has great material on that. But basically God is making a temple, and the image of him, the idols, he's placing those in there at the end, and this is going to be his dwelling place. Like all temples in ancient Near East thought that would be where the gods would reside once completed. So there's this temple motif in there as well.
Now, am I 100% sold on all this? No. And there are things that are weird about this tradition. For one, it does make heaven, as in paradise, the place where people used to go, at the very least, a physical place on earth, like you mentioned earlier, Gina. And that does sound a bit weird. Like souls staying on earth, but like going to a place, and it's underground, but not really, maybe. And it's also like physical, but not. There's a lot of weirdness to that.
Yeah, but I think our minds automatically go to this like lost world of Atlantis type of mentality where we got to find it, like we can find it type of thing. And
just like we can build a tower all the way up to heaven.
Yeah. That's a whole nother. I saw some atheist talking about the Tower of Babel. God hated the Tower of Babel, but it's okay with the space station. But that's a whole nother discussion.
Yeah, it's more the intention behind it than what you're actually doing.
They were literally trying to make a mountain to trap gods. So a little bit different.
A little bit.
I don't think the space station's meant to trap gods, but I could be wrong.
And also,
it's not even real.
NASA means, gosh, what did she say?
I thought it meant like something about deception or something.
I can't remember. Like it's ancient Hebrew for deception, and demons will take over the world and are aliens. That's what NASA really means in biblical Hebrew.
Nope.
Please edit all that out.
I will not. I will edit some of it out, but not all of it.
That's some of my conspiracy theorist family.
Yeah, there's a lot of weird stuff there. Yeah, again, not sure if I buy into it completely, and yet the idea that God, it's similar to the idea behind both the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Why did God put both of those trees there? If he knew we were going to sin and we shouldn't eat from the fruit of the tree of life. What is the function of the tree of life in this story? If he just knew we were going to sin and prepared for everything ahead of time, and it was a foregone conclusion. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm questioning God's sovereignty. I believe that he exists in all time simultaneously. All time is the present to him. But that doesn't mean that he revokes our ability to choose. And I think we chose wrong.
But if you have this idea of Elijah going back into Eden and waiting for revelation to happen, then is there some weird inception story of a second fall? And because then if they're back in Eden, they have access to the trees. To me, that doesn't make sense.
Technically, if Eden and Elijah are still humans, they would need to eat from the tree. That's one of the reasons Adam and Eve were kicked out of Eden, is because if they ate from the tree, they would live forever.
That's above my pay grade.
It's all conjecture, so it's hard to just be like, this is the way it is.
But it does indicate that there was still purpose. God didn't remove everything. He didn't destroy the garden or get rid of it or bring it up to heaven. He kept it on earth, and he just made it so that people couldn't enter it. So it clearly was there still to serve a purpose. But what purpose does Eden serve? We're told at the very...
I guess if what we said in the last episode is true, that the Acts church is the ideal church, then Eden is the ideal earth.
We're also told at the very end that this city, this New Jerusalem, is going to have the tree of life at the center of it. So the tree of life in some capacity is meant to be in heaven.
Are we still going to have the tree of knowledge of good and evil?
It doesn't say that. It just says the tree of life.
It also doesn't say they're getting rid of the tree of knowledge of good and evil.
That is true. It doesn't specifically say.
Which prophet's going to chop it down for us?
But that's what they're going to build that big house out of. It's the tree.
Where we can play football.
Lots and lots of
And the big football doesn't rhyme with anything, so why did we put that in the song?
And are they talking about American football or like what the rest of the world believes football is?
They mean real football. Get real, Cody. American football. It's American.
Not soccer.
No. It's not soccer, man.
Football.
Are you out of your mind? It's not soccer.
Practice.
But I do feel like God had a purpose for everything that he did. He still had a purpose for Eden. He still has a purpose for Eden. And it's tough because we're not explicitly told, but in tradition it says that the purpose for Eden is that's where the divine council is, which we can go into later. We've touched on that in a few different points. But that's where the divine council is, and that's also where human souls go that are righteous. It's Abraham's bosom.
But how is that Abraham's bosom if it was made before Abraham existed?
Why are you looking at me?
Sorry, I thought you were looking at questions.
I am, but I'm like at a loss. This one's like way over my head.
It's a lot of conjecture, so it's hard. There's the idea that the tree of knowledge of good and evil, we ate too soon from it. We would have been able to eat from it eventually, but we ate too soon from it.
The unripe fruit? Question mark?
No, we just weren't ready for it. It's just like this idea of maturity. Like it was put there because we would need it to understand the full scope of God.
That's a really interesting point because Adam was created full grown. So even in his adulthood, he was really not an adult.
He was a man-child.
In many ways, he was still a child.
It's like that movie Big with Tom Hanks. The mind of a child and the man of a body, or body of a man.
It's a horrible movie. I hate that movie.
I like, what was the one with Robin Williams better? Jack or something like that?
Except
it was a little bit better.
Yeah, he has super aging disease, so he just ages super fast.
Yeah.
But I do think that it's a point worth making, that everything that God made had a purpose. It was meant to serve a function. God didn't just slap a bad tree in the middle of Eden and tell us not to eat from it because it was a bad tree, just to test us and force us to fall because he knew we were going to fall, and so he made us fall, and he's just a big meanie. I think it probably was that there was going to be a time for it. One way or another, either it was going to be something where we had the choice of serving him or not, or more likely, and I agree with what you said, Cody, it was meant to be something where at some point you have to have the knowledge of good and evil. The angels in heaven have the knowledge of good and evil. God has the knowledge of good and evil. And in order for your love for him to be truly meaningful, you have to have the capacity to reject him, because otherwise you're a machine.
How could knowledge of evil be informational without the existence of evil?
It depends on, we have a very linear mindset. Like, you got to look at it from, you've watched The Matrix, right? Like a download of
All of the evil possibilities.
Yeah, see how stuff could be twisted. You could see how something could be twisted without actually experiencing the evil.
I don't know. My life verse is Philippians 4:8. The like whatever is true and good and noble and worthy of praise. So it's hard. Like, why would God want to add that corruption to the minds of his creation if we're not called to think of such things?
I don't necessarily think it's corruption. It is the knowledge of the opposite, knowing what could be if God wasn't good.
Not if God wasn't good, if man wasn't good.
It ultimately all comes back down to God.
So we teach children that there is evil in the world, and we do it in very specific, controlled ways. And it's important for us to teach them that there's evil in the world, because if they don't know that, they will be taken by it. And it's a little bit different, but this kind of goes into the idea of you introduce evil in a very specific, controlled way, but not evil itself, the knowledge of evil. Introducing evil into a child is horrible. It's disgusting and terrible, but introducing the knowledge of it to a child is very different, especially if you do it in the right and controlled way, because there is evil in this world.
It just implies that the knowledge of evil would have been more to do with angels than it would to do with humans.
I don't think so.
Look at Paul's example of learning the law. Paul wasn't saying that, I should find the verse and we will, but Paul talks about how he knows how to sin worse because he learns the law, which is perfect and good. He talks about how God's law is perfect and good, and the more he learned about the law, the more he knew how to sin. It wasn't that the law was evil, the opposite. We have the idea of opposite in our head now.
So it's the learning of evil through teaching from God as opposed to the learning of evil through the corruption of man through the fall.
And that's exactly what happened. Our attempt to learn about evil was through a sin. And that sin is what corrupted us, not the knowledge in and of itself. But in accepting the knowledge about evil, we acted in an evil way.
We chose evil.
We chose evil simultaneously as we gained the understanding of what it is that we did. And it would have been very different if God had sat us down and explained the nature of things. And let's say that you have two different sons or two different kids, whatever. You have two kids. One of them, you never let know anything. You don't teach them anything, because if they learn anything, there's always the possibility that knowledge will corrupt them. You just keep them close. You keep them sheltered. You keep them shielded. And we've known kids like this, like a lot of homeschool kids growing up. That was the image.
Hey,
that a lot
I resemble
of people,
that remark.
I resemble it. There was a lot of kids that we all probably knew growing up who were homeschooled and sheltered, and all of the evil of the world was kept away from them. And then you have another kid who isn't sheltered from any of that, and occasionally encounters bullying or something like that, and is forced to have to meet that evil with good. There's always the chance that they fail, and they fall because of it, and their life is horrible. And so the worst point of their life is going to be worse than that sheltered child. Absolutely. But the heights that they will rise to, both in their love for you and in their achievement, is going to be higher because they meet evil with good. And the only way you can do that is, one, if you encounter it, but two, if you understand it. And so sheltering us from the knowledge of evil, I don't think was in God's original plan. But the way that you meet that is important.
This is all very interesting.
Yeah.
I had this question when I was a kid that nobody could ever answer. And it got to a point where I was like, I would ask it just to bug people. But it was, if God created everything, who created God?
That's the point of God, though. The only uncaused causer.
Yeah, but imagine a 4-year-old pestering you over and over.
Well, and it's not an easy thing to wrap your mind around. That is the ultimate answer. The answer is that he's the uncaused causer. The trouble with the universe that we're in is that we encounter beginnings to pretty much everything. That seems to be the nature of all things. We encounter both time and its progression forward, and we also encounter beginnings to everything. And even cycles have beginnings. Even seemingly endless cycles are kicked off by something. And yet, no matter what you believe, it seems to be like all of this had a start. But then what was before the start? And I remember there was a very weird conversation between Piers Morgan and Richard Dawkins, where that's literally what Piers asked Dawkins. Richard, you can't tell me that there was nothing before the universe. That doesn't make sense. And Richard's,
You see, it simply doesn't make sense because that was before time itself. I don't claim to understand it. It doesn't make logical sense because I'm not a physicist, but a physicist will tell you that there was no time before the Big Bang. So therefore nothing could start it because there was no start. There was no prior. There's no nothing before it.
and that also doesn't make sense to us either. The very beginning of time itself. How can you begin time? There's no second negative one, no instigating act. So no matter what we believe or how we choose to approach things, something has to be beyond this cycle of time that we see. Even if you believe the universe itself is infinite, okay, but how is the universe itself transcendent of time?
This is why atheism doesn't make sense to me at all. Because you ascribe to something mystical as an atheist and can't explain it, or you believe that there's a God that created everything. Like, they're the same. Like, you're still having faith. Atheists, and who has that book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist? I think it's a Frank Turek book.
It sounds like Frank.
But like that idea, like the atheism, belief in the Big Bang, is as much of a religious faith as Christianity.
Tell that to 4-year-old Gina.
I would.
You should have done that in one of the picnics that you had in your dreams.
Oh, yeah. That was a couple years later.
This is cute, though. I like that. That's a cute story. I do think that the idea of God being completely eternal beyond time is something that a lot of Christians still struggle with. Understandably, it is really hard to wrap your brain around. But I think as long as you understand that no matter what, you have that problem. We just have that problem. And what's more, going off of what you said, Cody, there is a lot of faith that you have to have in order to be an atheist. Now, the atheist will say, yes, but I believe science. I believe in the structure of the universe. Why is the universe structured? That in and of itself is a religious presupposition. This is something that Dr. Jordan Peterson has talked a lot about. The idea that the universe doesn't have to be structured. Why is it that it's orderly? Why is it that it follows rules? Dr. William Lane Craig said it's much more likely that you would encounter in this big, chaotic, crazy universe just a tiny section of it that's acting what we would think is orderly for a very short period of time. But this seeming order is only a product of chaos and eventually will become chaotic itself and completely disappear, or the rules will change, or what have you.
It ties in so much to Chaos Waters because we're the only ordered planet in the universe that can be proved.
Because we live on it. And even then, how do you prove it? How do you prove that the universe was ordered 5 seconds ago?
No, it's just, it aligns with the Chaos Waters where God took our planet from chaos to order. For me, that is such strong evidence of a creator because we're the outlier, not the other way around.
Maybe, but other planets still have laws that they follow.
Yes, but not life.
Yeah.
Yes, God created the heavens and the earth. He did impose order on the entire universe. And yet, going back to what we talked about in this last episode that we had, the life that we have was the job that we were given. The rest of the universe doesn't seem to have that. It's all good, it's all pure, and yet it's in its own way chaotic. You look at Jupiter and there are all these storms across it. You look at Venus and it's got this toxic atmosphere, a beautiful, shiny, silvery atmosphere, but toxic all the same. There's nothing that lives on it. There's no person on it to shape it and grow it into something even more beautiful than it is now. Earth is this blue jewel that just sits in the midst of our solar system and our galaxy, where there are people on it to do work, to continually shape it and make it into something that more resembles its creator.
We shaped it so much so it went from flat to being a globe.
Let's not get political, Cody.
That's political?
I don't know. I assume there are people who vote based off of flat Earth. But the idea that the universe is ordered is something that is based in religion. We talked about this in a previous episode. Cambridge and Oxford were once monasteries, and there were monks who were testing their beliefs in the Bible through a logical process. And they also reasoned God is a God of logic and order. So if he is a God of logic and order, and he made the universe has to follow rules, it has to. because God is not chaos. And so they looked to the world around us and they started to try to explore that order. And in exploring that order, they got closer to God. Science is not inherently against religion. I hate it when people say that because it's not true.
No. They say that because they don't want to deal. It's hard to bring, there's a lot of philosophical thought behind religion, and marrying philosophy and science is very hard. And so they just choose not to do it or say that you can't. They don't live together, but they do. You okay?
I'm hungry. All this talk about the universe is just...
It makes you so hungry.
This is one of those episodes that's hard for me because I've not put a lot of thought into the idea of Eden being Gan Eden, or when heaven and hell and Sheol and Gehenna and all of that were made. I'm not that deep sometimes. I've never really thought about it, but it's definitely an interesting thing to talk about.
And it's definitely a very far edge of a rib issue. I don't think there's anybody who is going to lose any sleep over when exactly heaven and hell were formed. And by heaven, Gan Eden. It's like already, you have to specify so many things. It's not that it's a vitally important subject, but it's not it is, like you said, it's not something I thought much about. But then on hearing the Jewish tradition and on looking at the parable that Jesus told again in Luke about Lazarus and the rich man, it seems like a lot of these details are put in the Bible. And it's part of that enrichment that you can get from learning about the traditions and about learning the original language and about learning what Jesus said and what he may have meant when he said something. And it answers some of those small questions, those admittedly fairly small questions that we have that it feels like we don't really have answers to.
It's like when you evaluate, God put things places for reasons. If you look across the entirety of the Bible, God didn't arbitrarily do anything. There wasn't any act of randomness from God. He's very intentional. You see the layers in the generational names. There's just so many layers to scripture. We spent an hour talking just about avodah, like one word and all of the meanings across scripture. So to think that Eden is locked and closed and never to be used again, and trees that are pivotal to the existence of mankind are never going to be heard of or seen again until Revelation, and maybe then it's something different. Like, it is an interesting thing to ponder, and it takes Genesis all the way to the end of the Bible in Revelation. So it's the first and the last, and I do like that, and it's something I'm going to be thinking about a lot this week.
And I am sorry, full disclosure, this is not something that we talked about making an episode on.
No.
I just sneaked it into the outline, and then right before we did this episode, Gina's, what are these? And I got so excited and so happy.
You clapped.
Yes, I did.
There are some people who will take offense to this. I don't know if they listen to this podcast, but there was 6 days of creation. God only created in that period. He's not creating anymore. It's done. It was finished. Everything that was created then. Why would God stop creating?
Oh, there's a quote by G.K. Chesterton.
Yes.
So G.K. Chesterton, in his book Orthodoxy, wrote, and I don't know, maybe it's not his book Orthodoxy.
It is.
Okay.
Great book, by the way.
So G.K. Chesterton said in his book Orthodoxy, but perhaps God is strong enough to exult in monotony. It is possible that God says every morning, do it again to the sun, and every evening, do it again to the moon. It may not be automatic monotony that makes all daisies alike. It may be that God makes every daisy separately, but has never gotten tired of making them. It may be that he has the eternal appetite of infancy, for we have sinned and grown old, and our Father is younger than we. And there's another part about children, but that's sufficient.
There is a temptation, I think, for people who subscribe to a literal interpretation of Genesis to feel like God was just done, and that he doesn't continue to shape the world in any significant way. He does little touches here and there. He pushes things, and he definitely does some miracles sometimes. But those are the exception rather than the rule. When we look at nature, we do see things constantly change. We see new plants coming into existence all the time. And not random, a plant develops an ulcer, which gets cancer, which after several generations eventually develops into something useful. But no, we see fully developed, useful plants producing new, different, fully developed, useful plants that are specialized to live in the environments that they are. We see different types of animals, different lizards, different birds, different dogs.
Sea life especially.
Sea life especially, absolutely. Sea life that probably didn't exist as it currently does at the time of creation. I think
it's just proof of evolution.
with every lie, there is a grain of truth. I don't think that evolution is 100% wrong in its presupposition that things change. Things do change. They're changing all the time. But what we do see is full changes, not half-hearted, disgusting, misshapen quasimodos of creation that shamble around as just big mounds of tumors and pus and juices.
Stop it.
They're fully formed, beautiful, useful things. They are all tainted by sin, by the horrible world we live in. There is damage. There's damage to us. There's damage to the plants. There's damage to the animals. And that gets worse over time. And that's why we need ultimately for God to come in and wipe everything out and save what can be saved and start completely anew with a truly pure and beautiful creation. But that doesn't change the fact that while we are here, God hasn't abandoned us or his creation, and he is still in the creation business.
I think we forget because there's a lot of like super ultra serious people who talk about God because he's so holy and so big and mighty, and that's all true. But like we miss the like childlike, creative, clever, mischievous, humorous, wonderful, precious side of God. And that is the creator side. Do you think that God molded Adam in his hands and looked at him and wasn't like, he's like us? This is amazing. This is so amazing. Like he looked at the creation of the world and he was like, this is good. Do you think that he sat there and he was like, it's good? Or do you think he was like, yeah, I'm going to just be so happy and exuberant and joyful in this because we're made in his image. We feel what he feels. We have sides of us that are fun and creative and silly and playful. And if you look at some of the animals God created, he was being playful. Look at the platypus. He's serious and he's big and he's mighty and we owe him our respect, but we have to see the playfulness in him. We have to see that he still engages with us, and we know that he does through the Holy Spirit. So if his spirit is alive and active today, and we have proof of that as Christians, then how could we possibly believe that our God of order isn't also a God of like love and joy and playfulness? But people don't agree with me on that a lot.
I don't know why. I feel like it's pretty clear in Scripture. God, not only does he just have a sense of humor, but when you look at the fruits of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, there's joy in there. Mm-hmm. If the byproduct of the Spirit living in us is joy, that means that joy is a part of what the Spirit is, of who he is.
And it's not just a serene face where you feel peace inside your heart and you're sitting there placidly. Joy is a belly laugh. Like, how do you make somebody belly laugh?
When you read the stories of Jesus, really stop to read them.
Oh, he's so funny.
He's one of the funniest guys I've ever seen. Every single story, he knows what he's about to do. And he's joshing with people. You can see. Lazarus and his weeping there aside. Like when you look at the different stories of where he creates the bread for the 4,000 or the 5,000, the disciples are going up. And I have my issues with Robert Morris and the things that he's said and done. But he told a version of this that I thought actually was very true to the Bible story, where the disciples are all wanting to go home because Jesus has been preaching all day and they're all tired and they're looking for an excuse to go home and they're hungry and they want to eat. So they're like, hey, Jesus, we need to think of a selfless reason for saying this. They need to go home because they haven't eaten all day. They haven't. We're fine. We'd be happy to do this all day, but they need to go home. He's, oh, that's a good point. You give them something to eat. What? It would take 3 years' wages to feed all of these, to give them a bite to eat.
And then they find a child who has a little bit of food. Out of everybody, the most responsible person in the entire crowd is a little kid, really? That's what they bring Jesus?
And what Jesus says is, how much do you have? What do you mean, how much do we have? There's this kid, 5 loaves, 2 fish. That's probably what they were thinking is, okay, he's not going to take this from a kid. So let's bring the kid over here. Yeah, the least of these. The kid who has 2 barley buns, and 5 barley buns and 2 fish. That's about all the kid had. And then Jesus is, well, that's enough. Tell everyone to sit down. What? No, please don't do this. Oh, okay. And then at the end of it, after this miracle of splitting up all of this bread and all this fish,
there's leftovers.
There's 12 baskets of leftovers, 1 for each disciple. The unspoken part of this story, which I do think is there, is that the disciples were worried about themselves and Jesus provided for them.
He's a funny guy. And there's more.
So much more.
Go read the red letters in your Bible and then come back and tell us that you laughed. It's eternity, but it's not that serious. Real quick, we are working on revamping our website. So if you're looking for transcripts or resource links, all of the things that we talk about in our episodes are being linked on our website so that you have resources for yourself. You don't have to take our word for it. You can go and look at what we've looked at and see what you think for yourself. We also have a new blog that's going to be a very exciting launch, and we do have merchandise that we're selling now. So if you would like to purchase one of our Logic of God hats or sweatshirts or stickers or, I don't know, keychains and ornaments and shoes. No, I'm kidding. But if you want to go and take a look at that, you can support us in that way. But we are really thankful for your listenership and just the fact that you have stuck with us for the last, 18 months. And we're just praying for you and looking forward to engaging with you. So send us a message, reach out on social media, email us through our website. We would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our podcast today. If you liked what you heard, please feel free to subscribe and share and leave a positive review. And if you would like to connect with us on social media, you can do so on Instagram and Facebook at The Logic of God. You can also send us an email at main.thelogicofgod@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening. We hope you have a great day.